Hello and welcome to How I Hire, the podcast that taps directly into the best executive hiring advice and insights. I'm Roy Notowitz, founder and president of Noto Group Executive Search. You can learn more about us at notogroup.com. As a go-to firm for purpose-driven companies, we've been lucky to work with some of the world's most inspiring leaders as they've tackled the challenge of building high-performance leadership teams. On this podcast, I sit down with some of these very people to spark a conversation about how to achieve success in building strong, purposeful leadership for the next generation of companies. I'm talking with Denise Novosel today. Denise is the VP of Recruiting at Stitch Fix, where she brings amazing talent to the company to enable their continued growth and innovation. Prior to joining Stitch Fix, she was Senior Vice President of Talent Acquisition for Nike's global operations, corporate functions, and internal recruitment. Notably, Denise spent over 11 years at Microsoft, where she helped scale their entertainment business. Her team's contributions impacted major product launches, including Xbox One, Xbox 360, Surface, Kinect, and the Halo franchise. Denise is known as an innovative and creative talent acquisition leader. She's not afraid to take risks and looks for opportunities to find creative approaches to her work. Today, we'll get into the critical role of talent and, of course, talent strategy. We'll also discuss what effective talent strategy can look like and the tools and systems that streamline the process for all. Denise, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Roy. It's my pleasure.
So you're currently the VP of Recruiting at Stitch Fix, and before that, the VP of Talent Acquisition for Global Operations and Corporate Functions at Nike. What was your path to becoming a world-class talent acquisition leader?
Thanks for asking. It has been a long journey, but I would say first and foremost was just this passion that I have around talent strategies and the impact of talent can have on a business's performance. And I would say over time, had opportunities to be really immersed deeply with businesses in their growth stage and really seen the positive impact that we had when we had a really deeply connected talent strategy. And it wasn't just about recruiting talent, it was about the long range plan and what we were looking forward to in a business and the growth of the business. And so that's been a big key to how I have continued to grow and excel in the space.
Thinking about talent acquisition and recruiting in general, a lot of people don't think about this as a career. It wasn't something that was really presented as an option in school and things like that. So how did you get involved in recruiting and talent acquisition?
I would say probably 9 out of 10 people that you talk to who are in recruiting stumbled into it. I had made the decision that I was no longer going to pursue my path that I had planned to become a physical therapist, that going through an internship really solidified the fact that that wasn't my direction. So then what do I do next? So I was working for this outplacement firm, and I spent a lot of time working with executives on their search strategy. These were individuals who had been displaced from their corporate roles and were all in this process of looking for new opportunities. And so I engaged a lot with external search firms. And one day had a firm come to me and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a recruiter?" And I was like, well, no, I hadn't. And next thing you know, I was working as a recruiter for a small boutique search firm, and it just took off from there. And my love and passion for helping companies identify great talent and for people to identify that next great step in their career.
And what's interesting is that it's really evolved so much over the years, and just in general, it's a really dynamic and engaging discipline. It never gets old for me.
No, it's constant problem solving and trying to identify solutions for both the businesses that you're supporting and the people in which you're engaging. What's going to provide them that next amazing step in their career? What are the skills and capabilities that they want to gain or that they want to continue to develop, and being able to do that matching for companies. And when it comes together, Roy, it's magic.
And there's so many variables that are outside of our control, and we're intersecting with people's personal lives as well as their professional aspirations. And it's incredible, all the different things people don't really understand that goes the decision making and all the thoughtfulness and the consensus building and all the different things happening behind the scenes. Even just scheduling sometimes is
scheduling. I shout out to recruiting coordinators. I have to say it is probably the most difficult part of the job.
And maybe one of the most important, I would argue.
Absolutely. Our engagement with candidates, has to be like top notch. And our coordinators do a phenomenal job of that.
So, as a talent acquisition leader, you play a huge role in setting the strategy for the organization. What are some of the most important elements, in your opinion, for a successful talent acquisition strategy?
I think a lot of it has to do with thinking about the end-to-end enterprise needs and how are we thinking about your talent strategy from early in career all the way to executive and the overall makeup of the organization, how we're thinking about representation, how we're thinking about critical talent pipelines, critical capabilities, how are they linking to the overall business priorities, and how is the talent strategy linked to the long range plan. And so always ensuring that when developing strategies, there is a long range view around where are we headed as a company? What are the capabilities that we need for today, but maybe we don't have currently, but we're going to need in the future? And what are the different strategies that we want to put in place to ensure we're ready when we get to that point?
So, are you planning usually a year out, 2 years out, 3 years out? How far ahead of the curve can you get when you're building your strategy for talent acquisition?
In the ideal state, you're thinking about a long range plan anywhere from 1 to 3 years, but also recognizing that, the business landscape, the macroeconomic landscape, the dynamics, needing to be pretty agile with that too, knowing that you can't have a strategy that's fixed, that you need to have a little bit of agility in there, but having a direction to say, like, if we're moving into new markets or we're moving into new business segments, that we're thinking through the implications of that from a talent strategy lens.
Nowadays, systems and processes are really important, whether it's an applicant tracking system or a CRM or tools for hiring executives or managers to engage with talent acquisition. How do you think about systems and processes to make it more efficient and streamlined for both the hiring executives as well as the talent, and then also for your team to be able to access that talent efficiently?
I'm a huge advocate for consistency and simplification. And so I always think about it from the lens of people, processes, and tools. And, recognizing that you typically need to have probably 80 to 90% of things to be core and common to drive consistency and efficiency across the different processes, but recognizing that there are also nuances depending on the different populations in which you're serving. In my role at Stitch Fix, I have some very distinctly different populations that we recruit for. We recruit for high volume populations like our warehouse operations functions and our stylists. That requires a lot more scale and speed and efficiency versus like our corporate function hiring, which there is a different rigor, a process for those functions, but at the core, really wanting to drive consistency, because if you're a recruiter or a manager at Stitch Fix, it should feel very similar if you are recruiting engineers or you're recruiting folks for our strat and finance function. And so wanting to have some predictability and like efficiency of process and not wanting to recreate the wheel every time we're in a search process.
How do you influence and optimize that employment brand and then also the candidate experience? What are some examples of that?
I always feel like with the brand, it's all about connecting your external brand and the value proposition that you have as an organization, like whether it is a product, a service, platform, whatever it is, that there is a strong connection with your recruitment brand to the overall company brand, your purpose, how you're out in the world, if it's sustainability, whatever the things are, that there's a strong linkage from your employer brand to your overarching brand. And then really being able to showcase, like, what is it like to be an employee at Stitch Fix? Why do I love working at Stitch Fix? What are the different opportunities? What's the day in the life? Whether you are a stylist or you're one of our amazing folks working in our warehouse, like, what does that experience feel like? Or you're an engineer, like being able to showcase the different profiles of employees to be able to speak to those audiences and reach them. And then from like a candidate experience standpoint, really living this value that we have as an organization and like creating like magical experiences for candidates when they're going through the process, like get them very excited about the opportunity to work for our company and just the experience they had. Like I had an incredible interview experience when I went through the process with Stitch Fix. I felt deeply connected to those who were in the process. I had like a phenomenal coordinator, and it stays with you as a candidate. And, we're not always perfect, but it's an aspiration to do that every single time.
And a bad or a mediocre experience could have the opposite effect, right?
1000%. You want it to be memorable. And I've always during my time at Microsoft, during my time at Nike, and now my time at Stitch Fix, we always have to think about the candidates are our consumers. And so whether they get hired at our company, they'll continue to be a brand advocate and they'll likely continue to be a customer. And so always thinking about it from that angle too.
That's a great lead into my next question, which is because Microsoft, for example, has this incredible process, right, that they developed back in the mid 90s or late 90s, probably. What are some of the few takeaways or strategically important differentiators between the different companies where you worked and their approach to talent acquisition?
It's fascinating. I spent almost 12 years at Microsoft, and our recruitment process, recruiting talent was everything, and how candidates experienced us through the interview process and the rigor associated with that process. And it was very defined in how we approached it, how we collected and gathered feedback, how we communicated with candidates post-interview. There was a lot of consistency, which I've tried to model that in other experiences.
What about at Nike and then also coming into Stitch Fix? What is unique about their approach versus Nike or Microsoft?
In making the transition from Microsoft to Nike, it was interesting because we were in the midst of this digital transformation, direct to consumer, really elevating our presence from a technology standpoint and needing to be in a place where candidates could see Nike as a place where they could have an amazing technology career. And so just required a much more focused effort around how we were reaching those audiences and how we were engaging them. So I think it was really a lot about talking about Nike as a brand, talking about these amazing opportunities that people could have in the technology organization, and then really defining the appropriate process for folks to go through that assessment and evaluation process. And then pivoting to Stitch Fix, Stitch Fix has this incredible DNA around talent acquisition and the importance of recruitment. And historically, the company was a very leader-led recruiting model, which it's kind of this magic unlock that we have of this really embedded commitment to acquiring great talent and this deep understanding of how difficult it actually is to recruit top talent. So in coming in my new role, it was around how do we make that shift from this leader-led model, build out a world-class recruiting function, and truly have a recruiter-led model, but not lose this incredible DNA that we have with such deep leader engagement. And so the team and I, over the last 12 months, it's been how do we continue to unlock the magic of that and really leverage leaders in what I like to say, the moments that matter most. What are those key moments for leaders and for candidates in a process that we're able to take advantage of that awesome asset that we have?
Is there a case for one or the other, thinking about the leader-led approach versus the talent acquisition involvement and resources? And how do you balance those two things?
In certain stages of companies, it is so important to have leaders on the front line supporting and recruiting. And I think over time, as a company becomes more mature, we really need to have them focusing the bulk of their time and energy in their functional area. And so I think it's this almost this tipping point where you get to the point where from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint, it is much more efficient to have recruiters doing a lot more at the top of the funnel, the candidate identification, the candidate assessment, and then bringing leaders in when we get to a point where we need to have more active engagement with top prospects. And so I think it kind of comes down to a balancing act of people's time and where do you want their capacity spent? Our functional leaders, our engineering managers, we want them focused on product development. We don't want them spending their time trying to mine LinkedIn. Our team can do that.
You can bring a lot more value with a consistent expertise across all the functions versus maybe rolling the dice if somebody's not as capable or doesn't have as much time to invest in the recruiting process.
Yeah, and it's great to have like leaders who are actively engaged in communities too, whether it is on LinkedIn or their different social channels that like they're able to maintain that connectivity with external audiences. That's huge.
So you're still channeling their energy towards talent acquisition, but just in a very focused way.
Correct.
And so if anyone's interested actually in the early days of Stitch Fix and that operating system and the way hiring was approached early on, you can check out my first ever podcast of How I Hire, where I interviewed Lisa Bouget, and she talks a lot about the earlier days of Stitch Fix and how they approach hiring in that sort of distributed way. I'd like to take a moment to share some exciting news about an upcoming event happening in Portland, Oregon on April 19th and 20th called Mo Summit. Mo stands for Momentum, and the event is hosted by Big Path Capital, an investment bank that connects mission-driven companies and fund managers with mission-aligned investors. You may already be familiar with their highly regarded list of top 100 CEOs leading impact companies, and they expect about 150 leaders from far and near to attend. For listeners of this podcast, we've secured a discounted rate of $500 per attendee. Links to the registration and event information is in our show notes, and you can use code NOTO22 at registration to receive the discount. We hope to see you there. So what strategic and tactical priorities is your team tackling on a daily, weekly, monthly, or quarterly basis? What are the things that you're doing and that they're doing?
Like one of the key things that we've been focused on from like a tactical standpoint is our overall infrastructure and our technology roadmap, and really spending time assessing and evaluating our current systems, looking at where we have priorities, whether it is priorities around talent sourcing or priorities in the high volume space, to identify where we might need to make some adaptations to the current infrastructure that we have. Another key priority is around recruitment, marketing, and branding, and having a much more robust plan and strategy around that. And additionally, around university relations. Historically, we've had interns year over year, but we've not had like a deep programmatic effort and an approach to an intern strategy. And so as we think about strategic priorities over the long term, that's going to be key, and kind of back to our original conversation on the long range plan. When you're thinking about early and career talent, like you do need to be thinking 2 and 3 years out. Students who are interning this summer are not going to be likely full-time hires until 2023. And then that whole process and cadence. So you do have to be able to have a long range view. The other thing we are also embedding into our overall kind of day-to-day priorities is around our ability to forecast both hiring demand and forecast hiring ramps. How are we progressing against our month by month, quarter by quarter view, up against our team's commitment for what we set out to do for the fiscal year? So that's a big piece. And then how are we looking overall from a representation standpoint? And so recognizing that recruiting is just one lever to maintain and increase representation, but a key one.
That's a great call out as well. You're a senior talent acquisition leader, but you still get involved with recruiting, right? Tell us how and when and what you're involved with when you're rolling up your sleeves.
It's differed in my different roles. I would say I'm much more hands-on at Stitch Fix. I was hands-on at Nike, but a lot more hands-on at Stitch Fix. I personally run searches independently, and they're typically at our VP and above level, typically working with our executive leadership, whether it is on Chief Marketing Officer search or our VP of Total Rewards, our Chief Accounting Officer. So really those very senior roles where I'll work directly either with an external partner like your firm, Roy, and or do my own in-house sourcing. So just recently ran the whole end-to-end process for a VP search, did all my own sourcing, did all my own candidate engagement. So, but it honestly, as a recruiting leader, it keeps it real for me. I appreciate having time in the process and just engaging with candidates. Actually, and every time I talk to a candidate and I tell the Stitch Fix story, I get the rehire moment too. I get excited about it. And I also get to hear what folks are saying. Just kind of keeps it real for me.
So do you have a sequence or method for evaluating candidates at the executive level? Like, how do you know if somebody is capable, has the right leadership approach to be successful at Stitch Fix or anywhere else that you've worked?
In all of the companies that I've worked in, it's always linking to competencies first, and then connecting that to what are the key capabilities and attributes from a functional standpoint. So having really strong alignment on the front end with the cultural aspects of the company and that alignment and the key competencies associated, and having a good understanding of how you would see that exhibited, either to affirm that this individual is a strong match for your company or to identify where there might be gaps. And I do think sometimes in the assessment process, you might identify gaps. It doesn't mean that that person is not a fit for your organization, but a lot of times it just gives you insight into how you can support onboarding too. And so I think it's this link between the functional competencies and then how you think about the overall ecosystem of your company and the cultural attributes and competencies.
This is actually a shout out to executives. It's like, we need your help.
Yes.
It's really helpful when you really know your values, when you really know your capabilities and competencies, and if you have self-awareness around your leadership strengths and weaknesses in places that you're working or developing.
One of the things that I've always looked for in recruiting talent is, does this person have curiosity and excitement for whatever the product, service, whatever it is? Do they exude that engagement and interest? That's a huge thing, no matter what level, honestly.
Yeah, these are things that are really important when trying to figure out if they're going to match up within an organization, be able to thrive there. So let's talk about recruiting recruiters, because you and I both do that, or talent acquisition professionals. When hiring for your team, what do you think makes a great recruiter or talent acquisition professional?
Anyone who knows me knows one of my favorite things to do is recruit recruiters. My other favorite thing to do is to identify talent who I think would be a great recruiter and help them find a pathway into recruiting. One of the biggest things for me is it's this curiosity. It's curiosity about businesses, learning about businesses, learning about functions, learning about people. So kind of this natural curiosity, great instincts that you have an ability to problem solve, because a lot of times what we're doing is problem solving, trying to see how all the puzzle pieces fit together. Exceptional communication. How do you communicate both upwards to leaders you're partnering with, to candidates, maintaining that communication and just a sheer enthusiasm and excitement for the business.
Yeah, I think also there's a lot of moving parts, and just somebody who's really organized and can switch from one thing to the next, whether it's different jobs or different hiring executives. There's a lot of things happening.
And they can anticipate. They can see, I would say one of the things, the best recruiters, they can see around corners. They're 3 steps ahead of leaders, of candidates. They have a good sensibility about if something doesn't feel right with a candidate situation, that they're intervening at the right points and they're not just waiting for something to happen.
So conventional hiring practices and the traditional in-office work patterns have been challenged by the restrictions of the pandemic, speaking of candidate motivations for relocation. So how has this changed the talent landscape, and in what ways has it influenced your talent acquisition strategy?
The bright spot of the pandemic is it's opened up this whole opportunity for organizations to attract talent from anywhere and work from anywhere. And so it's opened up our access to talent. It does require teams to be super thoughtful about their remote-based teams and how do we ensure that we have great experiences for our employees when they're remote. For example, I have 2 of the directors on my team sit in the central time zone. So trying to think through, how do I ensure that they can maintain work-life balance and integrity of that, knowing that we're a Pacific time zone company and I'm on Pacific time zone. And so trying to always stay mindful of that. But it really has changed the landscape. It's definitely created a lot of movement, which we benefit from, but it's also a challenge for a lot of organizations too. We're seeing a lot of people make changes right now, which from the recruiting standpoint is great. There's appetite and energy, and we have abilities to hire. I can hire somebody sitting in Boise. I can hire somebody in Atlanta. I can hire across the country.
So if a company wants somebody to relocate, though, that has the reverse effect potentially in terms of limiting, even though there is a lot of churn within different markets. What are your thoughts about, the future? What aspects will be lasting And what aspects do you think will sort of revert back to the way it was before?
My sense is that we will be much more indexed to a remote workforce and much more indexed to a workforce that spends time coming on site for the different periods or moments, like, maybe it's a quarterly business review or it's some type of business focused or functional focused session. That I think we will pivot more towards those types of experiences, where historically it's been, hey, we're all going offsite. Now we're going to actually bring teams together for like purpose and reason, because I do think that there are still tons of value of bringing people together. So I think it's just a dynamic shift of when and how people will spend time together in offices. But there are also still roles where, like, I do think it makes a ton of sense for them to be in person. They're touching product on a daily basis. They're innovating. There's different roles that I do think require like a strong internal on-site presence.
I think also there's going to be more of satellite distributed offices. So people might not be in the corporate office, but might be working together in teams, maybe a technology team in one city versus a product creation team in another or whatever.
Yeah, coming together like in a hub setting.
I definitely think things will be more flexible overall in a very real way, no matter where you're located. So do you have any advice for anyone who might be thinking about making a career move in 2022, whether they're actively searching or just kind of thinking about making a move? Is this the time to do it? And what kind of advice do you have for them as they think about their options?
It's always a good time to contemplate a career move if you're in a position where you feel like you are stagnating or there are particular skills that you want to develop that you're unable to do that at your current employer. Like, always be looking towards the future of where am I headed in the next 3 to 5 years? Do I feel like I can get that growth and development at my current company, or do I need to actually look externally to do that? I think there's just so much opportunity. I think so for people that have that mindset, even if it's just on their radar, but not something that they're like must change jobs right now, that, hey, number one, make sure you're really representing yourself thoughtfully on LinkedIn. Like, what's your purpose? What's your value? Like, what are your superpowers? And make sure that's like coming to life in your
Help
profile.
us, please, because like there's not a lot of information sometimes on profiles.
And we guess sometimes we're able to make a little bit of a connection, but like, hey, even if you're thinking passively about making a move, refresh and, refresh and start making connections with folks too, whether it's companies of interest or different types of roles.
What do you think the hardest to fill jobs are right now, or disciplines? What do you think is kind of giving everyone a run for their money in talent acquisition?
I think everybody's go-to is always tech, for sure. I mean, there's always supply and demand challenges in technology. The demand always exceeds the supply. So that's always a challenge. And now there's just so much movement in that space. But I will say, like, what's increasingly challenging is acquiring great talent for hourly workforces. Like, the availability of talent, the competition for talent, the ongoing increases of wages, like, it is really challenging for many employers right now.
I think for us, we're doing a lot of digital direct to consumer roles, and also product creation is still always, especially in consumer goods like apparel or footwear in particular.
You have this like defined group of talent, and there's only a certain set of companies that you can pull from, which then is like another plug for early and career development types of programs.
Exactly. So what's exciting at Stitch Fix right now, and why should somebody listening to the podcast jump at the opportunity to work there?
This is like an amazing moment to be part of what we would call our second founding team. So, we had an incredible original business model around our 5 items in the box. We have now expanded that to incorporate freestyle. So you don't have to be a Fix customer to shop on our platform. And we have ongoing expansion with this platform and our ability to have a much broader reach. And we also have just this incredible community of stylists behind the scenes. And so we've got this like amazing art and science that brings both of those worlds together. And so as we're growing, scaling, and evolving this business, like, it's fun to be part of a big transformation. And like, as we say, be part of this second founding team.
That's awesome. And how would somebody interested in staying apprised of positions at Stitch Fix find your open positions or apply online?
You can go to stitchfix.com. We have a link like way at the bottom of the page for careers. It's hard because if you're thinking about it from a consumer standpoint, like it's obviously it's the same site, but there's a link to careers. But I would say like our leaders, our team, very active on LinkedIn. So you'll often see like most of our jobs get posted directly to LinkedIn. There's lots of engagement from the team on LinkedIn. So if there's a particular discipline that you're interested in, I mean, I would recommend starting to follow individuals who are leading those types of roles or recruiting for them.
That's great advice, and they can certainly find you and link to you there as well. Well, thanks so much. This has been super interesting and fun and informative, and you're obviously really great at what you do. And so I really appreciate you taking time to talk shop with me.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Thanks for tuning in to How I Hire. Visit howihire.com for more details about our show and our guests. We also love hearing from you. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or find us on LinkedIn. How I Hire is created by Noto Group Executive Search. To find out more about Noto Group, visit notogroup.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter there. This podcast was produced by A.O. McLean, LLC. To learn more about their work, visit aomclean.com.